What a wonderful harvest. What about you? You sure you want to leave? Oh, well, you'll join us someday. This is the No Fear Podcast. We know what scares you. I'm Matt.
I'm Mel,
And I'm Lisa.
and this is the No Fear Cast, the podcast where we dissect horror and all the things that scare us. Grab a cup of tea and sit down by the fire. This is the third episode in our series on cozy horror.
All right. We are discussing Over the Garden Wall. This is the third episode in our series on cozy horror, and I will say I think this is one of the coziest of all the cozy horror that you can watch. It is an animated miniseries. It originally aired on Cartoon Network in 2014. It's created by Patrick McHale, who went on to work on Adventure Time and Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio, among other things. It follows half brothers Wirt and Greg as they are lost in a mysterious woods and trying to find their way home. Over the Garden Wall has quite an impressive roster of voice actors. So, just to name a few, I could probably name many more who are on, but the ones that stood out to me at least were Elijah Wood, who stars as Wirt, the older brother of the two. Christopher Lloyd as the woodsman, who it's a recurring character on the show. He makes an appearance in several episodes. Tim Curry as Auntie Whispers, and Melanie Linsky as Beatrice, the bluebird. She also makes multiple appearances. So her storyline, like that of the woodsman, goes over multiple episodes and plays a big part in Wirt and Greg's adventures in the woods. Boom Studios, the same year, I believe in 2014, did a graphic novel comic version of this. So I'm sure that's still floating around out there. But we watched it. We watched the original miniseries. I believe there are 10 episodes that you can find. And I don't know, this was my first time watching this, but it has quite a cult following. Mel, you were the one who actually recommended this to us, so I think I will let you jump in here. And I'm really glad that you recommended this for cozy horror. But I don't know, what about it made you recommend this to us?
Well, I immediately thought of Over the Garden Wall when we first started talking about doing cozy horror. And I think, well, I'll talk a little bit about how I was introduced to it, and then I'll get a little bit more into why I think it's cozy. But short and sweet, I was hanging out with a couple friends a few years ago, and I think we were in a store and there were Over the Garden Wall t-shirts. And they were like, oh, cool, there's stuff over the garden wall in here. And they were like, Mel, surely you know what that is. What did you think of it? And I said, "Oh, I think I might have heard of it, but I don't know anything about it and I haven't watched it or anything." And they're like, "Oh, you need to check it out. We love it and we think that you would really enjoy it." And I was like, "Okay." And so I looked it up and I thought, "Oh yeah, this is something cool that I would like." And I kind of put off watching it. And then just like when somebody tells you, mentions like a red car or something, and then you start seeing a red car everywhere, I started noticing people talking about Over the Garden Wall on social media. And people would talk about it when fall was coming around as like this cozy thing that they like to do. Like, it's fall now, I'm going to watch all the episodes of Over the Garden Wall. And listeners, if you're interested in checking it out, it is on Hulu right now. And even though it has 10 episodes, they're each like 12 minutes long. So you really can watch it as like as a movie if you want to, like all in one sitting, or you can break it up or do it however you want. And so the first time I watched it, I'll have to say, I'm not going to get into specifics because I know we're going to talk about it, but I'll just say that when I first watched it, I was really into it. I thought it was cool, the kind of like pre 1950s music vibe. I think, Lisa, you put in our notes the title cards. If you look more closely at the title cards, there's a lot of like kind of almost like antique, uh, like almost like vintage postcard type images. At the top of the page is the skull with the wings that you often see on graves. It's set in the fall. It's a very Nathaniel Hawthorne-esque, going and getting lost in the woods, and there's darkness there. And when it starts out, you're just plopped into the unknown with these two boys, and they're just trying to get home, and they don't even know how they got there. And the show also has just a great sense of humor. There's scares. There's it's lower stakes, right? But there are stakes, and there's scary ghosts and things like that. Usually, things turn out to be not what they thought it was, or they learn something from the experience. But I was just enjoying the humor and the mystery of trying to figure it out, and kind of the creepiness of it and the fall vibes. But when it moved on and I saw what was going on with the woodsman character and the idea of the beast in the woods, it really kind of hooked me. And then I love the end. Like the end, that was what I think made me fall in love with it, was how it was handled toward the end. And that, I think I mentioned this to Lisa when I was texting about rewatching it. I had to rewatch it in piecemeal. And so I had some time. And when I finished it, I just went back to the beginning and started again. I was like, oh my gosh, like all the stuff from the end that's seeded throughout it that's coming and you don't know it. I mean, of course, things do this, but it's just so tight and it works so well. So, yeah, I think it's like a warm hug, but it's also got a little bit of a bite to it, I guess. And it's perfect for fall. Like the nostalgic music, the the colors that they use, the fact that they're in the woods with fall colors, all that sort of stuff. I mean, it's just perfect for this time of year. So, Lisa, when you were bouncing around that we should do cozy horror at some point, I thought immediately we need to at least, if we don't do a whole episode on Over the Garden Wall, we got to at least talk about it because there's a lot of potential there. And it has a huge following, like you said. I think, what was it, the 10th anniversary was recent, and everybody was very excited about that. So I'm so glad we were able to do this. And I'm so glad you guys liked it because we were chatting a little bit about it before we hit record.
Yeah, I did really enjoy this. In fact, I watched this with my kids, and it, it's rare, I think, that we find something that everybody likes, that everybody is sitting down and enjoying. And this was definitely one of those. It definitely, I can see why people would want to turn this on at, as soon as the weather starts turning crisp. I like your description of it as almost like an animated version of a Nathaniel Hawthorne story, because even some of the characters, like the woodsman, struck me as almost puritanical in the way that they were presented. Uh, but there's a really good mystery going through, because you don't really know why these boys are lost. You don't know how they got there. You don't know where their home is. And it's almost unmoored from time. Like, you start learning more about the mystery, I think, in the last two episodes. Um, yeah, so it does have this kind of timeless feel. Like it's an Alice in Wonderland almost kind of feeling to it, where once you're in the woods, you're in an entirely different time, an entirely different space, and there was just enough weirdness in this that really kept me entertained, and you don't see that a whole lot. Just the kind of things that they would come across. It was like a fairy tale, but just bizarre. And I very much appreciated it. And also, there were a lot of moments that were genuinely scary, and I'm sure we'll talk about those too. But I liked how it could balance kind of the cute, cozy vibes with, oh my gosh, that's really terrifying and might give me nightmares. um, so I liked it. Like, it didn't go too far into it. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. I'm glad you recommended it.
I enjoyed it as well. I know I said this before we pressed record on the episode, but saying it on the record now officially. Also, very glad that you recommended this, Mel. And Lisa, I completely agree with what you were saying about not just that it's timeless, but it almost feels like it takes place in a place outside of time, almost like the woods, which I think they refer to it as the unknown. um like the woods seems like its own self-contained sort of little mini universe, so to speak, because there's a lot of overlap with our own world, but then there are these like very, very fairy tale-esque moments, and that I think is also where a lot of, like you were talking about, Lisa, the horror comes from, the horror elements at least. um but yeah, it really did. It surprisingly resonated with me. Like I was expecting to like it, but I was not expecting by the end. Like I was just said, wow. Yeah, it was so very well done. But I went into it. I tried to go into it fairly blind. Like I didn't look up too much about it, so I didn't realize it was by Patrick McHale. Which, if I'd known that, I might have been prepared a little more to be wowed through it, because Adventure Time is seems very silly, but is actually very, very good and poignant when you look below the surface. And same with this one. And there's a lot to talk about too, because in some ways it almost felt like not like a magic trick is sort of what I'm trying to say, or maybe bait and switch, but he does something really interesting with the way he sets up the brothers and has them dressed and acting, that when you find out all of the full story behind everything, it's not what you would have thought. It's certainly not what I predicted. And I'm kind of hemming and hawing around the edges of it, because I'm sure we'll talk about it a little more in detail a little bit further into the episode. But I do want to tag it with a spoiler warning before we get there. But I loved it. I thought it was great. This is definitely something that it feels like a good, I mean, it fits the cozy vibe that we've talked about so much already. Like it feels like a blanket and a cup of hot tea on the couch. And so I may very well make this a something that I revisit in future falls to come.
Well, I do want to jump in a little bit since this is a horror podcast, and I think this is a really good explanation of like what cozy horror is, because I do think it's easy to pinpoint like the coziness of a show like this. It's um just even the music. I mean, the music was gorgeous. Like, it was very old timey, coming through a phonograph. um the artwork, the title card, just everything. But I do want to talk about how it balanced the horror with it. um so in our last episode, we discussed our Richard Scary Meets Dexter graphic novel, Beneath the Trees Where Nobody Sees, and that had horror. I mean, obviously the connections to Dexter we talked a lot about, but where you have a serial killer who you're kind of rooting for. But in this case, you're watching Wirt and Greg kind of navigate this world where they don't know the rules of what's happening, and they don't really know who they're going to encounter. It reminded me a lot of like that movie Spirited Away, where you kind of cross over into a different world, and then you're expected to try to understand the rules of the new world. But for me, at least, there were two, three, maybe, if I'm going to push it, really pure moments of horror. Um, that episode, which was early on, I want to say it was episode 2 with the pumpkin people. I don't know if that's what they were called. But it was basically like where what was it? It was Pottsfield, the town that they were in, and there were these. They were wearing these like pumpkins on their head and costumes, and they were having some sort of harvest festival. Um, and they're told to like dig graves out in the field, which was just really bizarre. And then the ringing of the bell, that was the one that really really got me, because that's where we meet Auntie Whispers. And Auntie Whispers is a scary enough, I think, creature, but then you have the magic bell that she's using to control a young lady named Lorna, who she's apparently keeping in her cottage like a prisoner. And so we're meant to think that Lorna is the one who is in trouble and who they have to like save from Auntie Whispers, because Auntie Whispers seems so like foreboding and controlling. But you find out later that her bell has a good purpose, in that it is keeping the like demon, for lack of a better word, that is possessing Lorna, and it's keeping that in check. So at one point, when they're trying to help Lorna escape from Auntie Whispers, the demon comes out, and it was quite terrifying. The third one was towards the end, so I don't want to talk about that yet, but I'm just going to throw that out there. Mel, I know you had thoughts on the pumpkin people, because we did text about that a little bit as we were watching, but I don't know, the ringing of the bell might have been one of my favorite episodes. That was episode 7, for those of you listening, but that was a fun turn that I was not expecting.
Yeah, I don't know if I could pick a favorite episode, but I know the first time I watched it, the Pumpkin People episode was, I mean, I really enjoyed the first one because it sets up the mystery and it sets up a lot of the themes really well. Um, from the woodsman basically kind of berating Word at one point because he's like, "You're the elder child, you're responsible." And we have this theme of the brothers and their relationship, because there's kind of like baggage there. You know, you have a teenager and his younger brother, but this idea of who's responsible, and what needs to be done to get them home and keep them safe. And that's when you have the introduction to the woodsman and the beast, and that's also when there's kind of a turnabout with the beast, because they think they've seen it, and they hear him in the woods, but they don't actually see him that time. But yeah, episode 2 was where I was fully like, "Oh, this is great," because I think the pumpkin episode, I don't know, I'm going to go more off of feelings, I guess, about this, but I think the pumpkin episode, the first one is great. It sets up that like Washington Irving, Nathaniel Hawthorne thing. It sets up our major themes of the unknown, this Alice in Wonderland, timeless stuff, fairy tale, woodsman in the woods, who can you trust? And then episode 2 just it just completely goes into fall, basically. And you have again them interpreting things and it kind of turning out differently, but I thought that was so. And also they play with the idea of a cult too, and so it is creepy. It is. When I was rewatching it, I was like, oh, even though I kind of know what's going to happen from the last time I saw it, it does have this kind of creepiness. This is when they meet Beatrice the bird, who can talk, and Wirt is obsessed with finding a town to get back to where they come from, even though they don't understand it. In the unknown, it'll be very difficult to go back. And they find this abandoned town, and everybody is in this barn, like doing a harvest festival, like corn husking type thing. But everybody has a pumpkin on their head, and of course they look like they don't belong there. And so Beatrice is basically like, this is a cult. We need to get out of here. And Wirt is like, no, maybe we can get help. And yeah, then you have the large pumpkin kind of step out of the middle thing that they're doing a maypole type thing around, and basically says that they need to be punished for their transgressions. And then you have this like thing where they have to do manual labor, and it's like nostalgia. They're picking corn and doing all sorts of like fall and harvest things, even though they have chains on them because they're technically prisoners. And then, like you said, at the end, they're supposed to be digging these holes that they believe are going to be their graves. And it turns out they open an old grave, and these people were skeletons the whole time. So I think episode 2 was kind of when I fully bought in, because I was like, there's weirdness here. It's really hitting the fall nostalgia, but it's also giving it like a Shirley Jackson uncanny creepy vibe. It was like a Twilight Zone episode or something, but it also had the humor of thinking things were going to go a certain way that was really creepy and kind of scary. And even though it didn't lose the edge, because the pumpkin's like, well, you'll come back someday, because there's a lot of existential themes in this too for a show with 2 kids in it. They get away. So yeah, I feel like we really get that kind of uncanny feeling of dread and like this idea of cults, but with the weird fall nostalgia. And then the ringing of the bell, I just think that episode is great as well, because just like you said, Lisa, the person they think is the bad person is not. It's actually the young girl. And I thought Auntie Whispers was a cool character because she's very creepy, but it turns out she's not at all. The demon that's in Lorna is a really terrifying thing. And I like that you mentioned Spirited Away, because this also reminds me of Spirited Away. And Auntie Whispers is one of the characters that I'm like, oh my gosh, she could be in a Miyazaki film. She could walk right out of it. And at the end of the episode, where she warns them not to go to Adelaide because, she knows her because Adelaide's her sister. I was like, this is just, you know, very interesting parallels, I think, to the two, and kind of an otherworldly type thing, and almost like a witch character. I think my other favorite episodes beyond those two would have to be the final two, or besides those three, would have to be the final 2 episodes this season. I know we don't want to get too far away. But I know, Lisa, you didn't want to talk about some of the end stuff with the Beast and the Woodsman, but I think in the first half, we get enough information about the Beast and the Woodsman to see that as a scary thing too. I mean, the Beast is this figure who lives in the woods and is constantly singing this song about submission. And what's the one song he sings? It's basically, he says something about burying yourself in the soil, I think is what he says. Submit to the soil of the earth. Like, he's constantly working at people to scare them and put them into despair. And we don't know who the Beast is most of the show. At first, they think it might be the Woodsman, then they think it's somebody else. So that threat that's in the woods following them, there's the little things in the episodes that scare them, but I liked this overarching kind of mystery villain of the Beast, and the way they're kind of just learning a little bit more about the Beast at every adventure until it gets to the end, where he's the last like final boss, I guess you would say, they have to get through. But there's always, even with all the nostalgia and the fall vibes, there's always that they're going to have to face that at some point. They're going to have to face that, and they're going to have to face how they got there in the first place.
Well, Mel, I'm glad you both mentioned Spirited Away, because that was so much on my mind while watching this. And that, I don't say that to say that it's derivative. It is in no way derivative of Spirited Away. It is very much its own unique thing, but they have very similar vibes. And I absolutely agree that Auntie Whispers would 100% fit at home in a Miyazaki film. But I don't have much else to add, except I just wanted to like reiterate what you were kind of talking about how so many of the episodes and the show as a whole, even, it plays so well with subverting what you think is going to actually happen. It sets up a scenario that you think is what's going on, and you're kind of in the shoes of Wirt and his brother, where you're like, oh, okay, so this is what's happening. There's this nice girl, and she's got this crazy weird aunt named Auntie Whispers, who, oh my god, she's terrifyingly looking, and very easily sets up Auntie Whispers to be kind of villainous, this overprotective Cinderella kind of wicked stepmother or something like that. And by the end, you realize, oh no, she genuinely loves her niece and was genuinely trying to protect her and everyone else by keeping this demonic thing at bay with the bell. So, I mean, it wasn't some weird, overreaching, uh, controlling, wicked stepmother. She was actually a caring, loving caregiver. And I mean, so many of the episodes do that, but not all of them, because it's it's smart enough to not do that same trick to death, basically. But when it does it so well. Like it's just like when you have that moment of realization of, oh, this is nothing like I thought it actually was. This is, in fact, almost the opposite, or just very different than my initial first impression was. And I really like that. I love things that can do that, and this one in particular, it seemed to kind of have a very nice sort of subtle message of, don't always judge everything by the first appearances, because that's not always the reality. The first impression, the first appearance of someone, something, some situation may in fact not be the reality of it at all. And when you look deeper and have all of the facts and information, oh, it turns out it's not at all what you thought. And man, is that not an important thing for all of us, to not rush to judgment and immediately make a snap decision, or form an opinion just immediately based on something, but to actually look deeper at everything. I mean, I think that's, well, I mean, a very timely message, if I may say so.
Well, and that ends up being a theme that is stretched out over the course of the miniseries too, which was really nice to see just as a viewer, but then also you kind of it's something that Wirt and Greg are learning as well. And just on a narrative level, I like the idea of subverting expectations too, because this show is surprisingly both heartfelt and also funny, like genuinely funny. When just that episode to begin with, talking about the ringing of the bell, since that's the one we're talking about right now, when they're running in from the rain and they're like, oh, there's an abandoned house, which of course it's not abandoned. uh but they run in and they find the barrel of turtles that they end up hiding in from Auntie Whispers. But I think it's Greg who says, how odd to find a barrel of turtles in an abandoned house. And it's one of those things that it's such a bizarre line that it made me laugh, but then also it was incredibly sweet too, because I mean, clearly the house is not abandoned. um and there was just so many instances of that throughout that I think, I think when we do talk about cozy horror and we talk about like what that means, because it does seem contradictory. I think that that's part of it too, is you are taking an atmosphere that could be creepy, um and weaving in humor, weaving in that deeper emotion that I think Lynn this I don't know, this is just a really good example of that.
I completely agree about the humor. There were several like notable times where like I laughed out loud throughout it. And at times I found Greg to be a little tedious with his it's just the kind of it's just his temperament. It's not a character that I always enjoy, but I mean I liked the character overall. Um but I did absolutely die practically every time he would say one of his rock facts, because he would say something just absolutely absurd and nonsensical and be like, it's a rock fact, and take out a rock that has a little face painted on it, and it was so random that I mean I loved it. I cackled.
I think we all need rock facts. I mean, honestly. Well, and I think that that character is supposed to be a little bit kind of grating the way you were describing it, Matt, because they're not just brothers. I mean, they're half brothers. Like we learned that at one point, because he says Wirt says something along the lines of like, well, your father. Um, so that I guess the idea is that they share a mother, but not a father. And Wirt doesn't, I guess, kind of feels like an outsider in the family, especially with Greg's father. So there's already that disconnect between the brothers, that they are only half brothers, but and of course, like, it changes over the course of the series, but Wirt is so focused on just getting back home. And he clearly loves his brother. He wants to take care of his brother. He wants to make sure his brother gets home safely. But for a lot of the series, you can feel his fatigue with his brother's personality too, which I think is something that's really interesting, and it works well. And I don't want to like completely push us towards the end, but there is a moment in towards the end where we find out more about the monster and the woodsman and what's really been going on there, but where Greg is put into real danger of, we don't know if he's actually going to come out of this alive. He's in one of the, what do they call it, the Edelwood trees, um and has basically is in danger of like being trapped there forever. And I think that's really where you see this like connection between the brothers really solidify, because I think he is kind of drawn that way. He is drawn to be, he's cute, he's precocious, but he's gonna grate on your nerves. And I think that that's important for where we kind of end this emotional arc between the two brothers.
Yeah, I think one of the things I really love about this show, and I'm not going to push us too close to the end, but I just was thinking about this while you're talking, Lisa. We can go back and talk about other episodes if you want to as well. But one of the things I loved about the show is not just the kind of reveal of what was happening, but also, I mean, it tugged on my heartstrings. It has a kind of emotional arc that you're describing as well, because we see we see what the relationship has been and we see how it's shifting and changing. But once you get to those last three episodes, when Wirt starts giving up, which is what the beast wants. I mean, I guess we could also look at the unknown and the beast as like a metaphor for losing hope or maybe depression. And I think it's the third from the last. Wirt basically is done. He's like, why do we keep deceiving ourselves that we're going to get home? There's no way to go home. We're done. And he basically tells Greg it's all his fault that they ended up there. And so Greg decides that if it was his fault, then he needs to take responsibility for it. And he has this bizarro dream where he ends up in Cloud City, and the star he was wishing on, there's a woman, and she comes up to him and she says, you can wish for anything you want. And he's like, well, I'm trying to go home because, I did this thing. It's my fault. And I'm trying to fix it. And she says, oh, well, you could just wish you go home. And so he says, okay, cool, I'll get Wirt. And she's like, you can only go home by yourself. Like, Wirt's done. Like you were saying, he's getting wrapped up in this tree, basically. At that point, it's Wirt. And Greg whispers in her ear, and she's like, really? And so it's implied, because he goes back, that his wish was to just go back and be with Wirt. And he goes back and he ends up making a deal with the beast because he can't get Wirt to move or get away from the tree. So he leaves, Wirt, and I can't remember what he's calling the frog at that point, Benjamin Franklin or something, like behind. And he goes to meet the beast, and we see him like, basically trying to make a deal to get out of the woods or whatever. And at the end of that episode, when Wirt wakes up and realizes that Greg is gone and he hasn't taken care of him, which was his responsibility, I think it's at the very end of that episode, he leaves, or it's the beginning of the next one, but he leaves the Beatrice's family, who's been taking care of him because he fell into the lake and almost died, basically. And they're like, no, don't go. Like, it's still snowing. And they say, you're not going to do any good to your brother if you're dead. And he said, I've never done any good for my brother while I was alive. And yeah, seeing Greg take it upon his shoulders as a very, very, very young child to go and do this and try to sacrifice himself for Wirt, and then seeing Wirt put the pieces together and realize kind of what's happening. Like, when you watch the beginning of the show, I don't think you see that kind of emotional gut punch happening, but the show really does have a heart. And I think that's one of its big strengths. I think if it didn't have that, it would still have all the positives we've been talking about, but it's that kind of end where you see that relationship that I think is so powerful about it.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Mel, talking about this idea of this having a true emotional heft to it that I was not expecting, because I mean, we're watching essentially one we're watching a cartoon that lasts about 10 minutes, you know, about an older brother who looks kind of like a garden gnome, and a younger brother who has a talking rock in his pocket, rock facts. A frog that he's continuously renaming, and a teapot on his head. And, it's not really explained until the very end, why they're dressed this way and what's really going on. But when you're watching that, you're not expecting it to have that kind of emotional weight to it that it does. And then, I mentioned, so I do want to talk about the ending a little bit, because I think one of the really terrifying things for me was, after you had spent so much time, or I spent so much time watching this, um, you see that basically it's after the ringing of the bell, they go off, and there's this really weird, like, Cloud City dream thing that the north wind enters in, It's basically Greg dreaming this like Cloud City thing. And Wirt has all all but given up at this point. Like you can really kind of feel the depression hitting him of he feels hopeless. He feels like they're not getting out of this place. Greg tries to get him moving and is unsuccessful. And so they end up splitting. And basically, what ends up happening, and we're spoiling everything, just so you know. But they end up splitting, and there's a bad snowstorm. And so his brother Wirt has to go after Greg. And that's when they find him. And this is where I said this was a really terrifying moment for me. But it was when Greg was entwined in the Edelwood branches and they encounter the beast and the woodsman. So it's kind of come full circle from where we were at the beginning of this. And I don't know, it was just this realization of I think Greg realizing how much he loves his I mean not Greg, Wirt realizing how much he loves his brother and wanting to save him, but realizing that it may be too late. That is what I think really kind of got me. So it was different from like the Auntie Whispers Lorna scare, where that to me was just kind of what I would consider like pure horror. Like there was a jump scare, when Lorna turned into the demon, or even the pumpkin people in episode 2, where it was just weird. It wasn't really super scary, but the imagery of it was just weird enough that I thought, oh, this could probably, get into my dreams tonight and cook up something super weird. Um it was, I think, this idea of realizing what you had and not being able to save it. And so it's like this realization of it all came too late. And so it was kind of an emotional horror that I think really struck me. And of course, this is all after the episode, because in the penultimate episode, we get the kind of flashback to how they got in the woods. And we learned that they were trick or treating on Halloween. And Wirt had kind of thrown on a costume that I guess was a garden gnome. That was kind of the joke, as somebody says, "Are you a garden gnome?" And he had been focused on wanting to give this like mixtape to his crush and like go off, with his friends. And Wirt was supposed to be an elephant wearing the teapot on his head. But Wirt was just following him around, kind of like, you promised you would go, that they would go look for frogs. And he's just continuously trying to get rid of his little brother. He's just like, leave me alone. I've got important things. I've got grown up things to do. Like, he's off being a teenager and his brother's annoying him. And they end up in a long way of explaining it is they end up running away, because they all follow his crush and his friends into a graveyard where they're telling spooky stories, and they get interrupted by the cops, and so he runs away, thinking he's going to get in trouble, even though he won't. But they end up jumping over the wall and landing in a lake, falling unconscious as they do. Um, so I don't know. It was just this idea of losing somebody. And by that point, we had spent so much time with Greg. I was just like, I don't want Greg to go anywhere. And of course, that was it was I guess amplified by the fact that you realized the woodsman had been carrying this lantern, which I guess was really the beast, and keeping that alive when he thought it was his daughter that he had lost. So you see kind of a mirror in the woodsman's story and what is happening with Wirt and Greg. I don't know, it was just very heavy. And so I think that it was a different type of horror, but I was just like, oh my gosh. I just felt so much for them by that point.
Yeah, I feel like the and that's what I meant too with the when I was talking about the bait and switch, because we are introduced to Wirt and Greg as a, what looks to be a garden gnome and his younger brother who has a teapot on his head. So I mean, it's real. We as viewers, I did at least, jumped to the conclusion of, okay, well, there's some sort of fantastical creatures that are also in this new fantastical land that they've never experienced before. Okay. And then when we get the flashback and see, oh, they're actually from our world, like he's in high school and has a crush and he's a little awkward and all of that. I don't know. The last two episodes, it really it changes, and I would even say that the horror elements are more like existential horror. Like you said, the fear of losing someone, the fear of, I mean, wait, no, is Wirt the gnome? Wirt's the gnome. Greg's the younger brother,
Yeah,
right?
Wirt's the gnome.
Okay. And I mean, then there's also Wirt's. Yeah, I mean, he's that stereotypical socially awkward high school kid who has a crush that he has no idea how to talk to, and a younger half brother that he doesn't have much in common with because there's an age gap, and he feels like he's more mature, and his brother is still a kid, and I mean, God, if that didn't resonate with me, at least, I don't know about both of you, but it sure resonated with. I was like, okay, I've been in several of these positions. um don't have a younger half brother, but I do have a younger brother who's 5 years younger than me, and it's big enough age gap that when you're in high school, yeah, that's an annoying little bratty kid. I'm almost an adult. I have nothing to do with this kid. And all of that wrapped up in like you said, Lisa, the existential horror of almost just kind of giving up and giving in to this place. uh I mean, that it really is just it's so very poignant. But I would say, and I don't want to rush us to the very, very end, but it's almost like the final moments give you a bit of hope, though, because I mean, spoiler, of course, because we've already spoiled quite a bit, but they do end up making it out okay. But we get also a glimpse of all of the other people that they've interacted with throughout the series, and you see how them coming through has changed and impacted the lives of all of the people that they encountered along the way. People and things, I should say. Not all of them are actual people per se, but all of the creatures that they encountered throughout this story, Wirt and Greg have had an impact on, and in a positive way. And man, if that isn't like such a testament of resilience, that even one small, lowly, socially awkward high school kid and his dorky younger brother can have massive impacts on the people around them that they encounter. I mean, man, what does that say for the rest of us? I I mm, I do love that message.
Yeah, I completely agree with what both of you are saying. And yeah, I agree with you, Matt, on how we see how they positively impact these people, which I thought was really cool that we had that, because These last 2 episodes are so packed with information. I mean, we basically find out at the end that the whole time they've been in the unknown, they were like unconscious in the lake, right? So the unknown is almost like an underworld that they had to go through and face all these things. But it doesn't just say, oh, that was a dream that, one of them had. We find out when Wirt wakes up in the hospital because he basically figures out what Lisa was saying, that the beast has tricked the woodsman into keeping him alive and not his daughter. Wirt stands up to the beast in a way that nobody else in that place has been able to do. And he's like, I'm going to get Greg back. I know what I have to do now. Gets Greg, and Benjamin Franklin, or whatever, the frog, pulls him out of the water. People get there to help them at that point. And when he wakes up in the hospital, they're not only getting reintegrated into their community, because all of Wirt's insecurities and anxieties, fully understandable anxieties, I totally felt for Wirt and his music and poetry and everything he was going through. But Sarah's there. There's, Jason Funderburker, his rival, is part of the group. And Greg is telling everybody about the adventures that the frog, which is now named Jason Funderburker, and Wirt had. So it's still real for them. They didn't just have some joined dream. They actually went on this trip. And I love that montage at the end where it shows that they changed and improved and helped the lives of the people in the unknown too. And I think some shows might have just cut it off and been like, oh, this just all happened while they were in the river. But this is an important part of their relationship, and it's an important part of the way they come back into their own world and the change that they made in that world. So I just thought that that was really cool, that it took a both and approach kind of at the end. Just like it took both Wirt and Greg to get out, it also allows us to have had the adventure and be in the real world too, which I thought was pretty cool. Well, I think that might be a good place to start, because I mean, we've hit the end montage. There's really not that much more to talk about with Over the Garden Wall. But listeners, we warned you about spoilers, so I hope if you were worried about spoilers, you went and watched it and then came back. Or if you don't mind spoilers, our discussion of this and how much we enjoyed it has talked you into checking it out, and hopefully it'll become part of your cozy falls in the future. We are at No Fear Cast on Twitter and Instagram, and we have a Facebook page. Our email is nofearcast@gmail.com. If you love what we are doing, please consider supporting us on Patreon. We also have merchandise available at our website, nofearcast.com, or you can simply rate and review us, which is entirely free and helps other listeners find us. Theme music by Nicholas Gasparini. We will be back in 2 weeks with a brand new episode.